Ferdinand Magellan gets all the credit, but what if history got it wrong? What if the first to successfully circumnavigate the world was not even European, but an enslaved Southeast Asian who vanished from the records? Meet Enrique de Malacca, stolen from his homeland and forced to serve Magellan. But did he pull off the greatest escape in history and successfully sail around the world before anyone else did? Was Enrique truly the first circumnavigator of the world? And if that is true, then why did history forget him? Mabuhay! Earn Kapampangan, luwid kayo, and salam to our friends and loved ones in Indonesia, Malaysia, and Brunei. Welcome to my channel, it's me Kirby Araullo, your Filipino historian. You've probably heard that Ferdinand Magellan led the first successful circumnavigation of the world. But what if that mainstream history, that dominant narrative, leaves out the person who actually made it possible? The person who might have been the first one to actually complete the journey before any European. In today's video, we'll uncover the forgotten story of Enrique de Malacca, an enslaved interpreter, a skilled navigator, and quite possibly the first true circumnavigator. And along the way, you'll learn how colonial history reshaped our collective memories and global narratives, and why Enrique's story still matters today. Who was Enrique de Malacca? A forgotten slave? A hidden revolutionary? Or the first to truly circle the globe? Before Magellan set sail, before the Battle of Mactan, before the Spaniards even set foot in the Philippines, there was Enrique de Malacca, or Henry the Black. But who exactly was Enrique? A kidnapped slave? A trusted interpreter? Or someone with a much bigger role in history? Enrique was captured at a young age, back in 1511, during the Portuguese conquest of the Sultanate of Malacca in what is now Malaysia. It is also worth noting that the Luzones people played a critical role in this conquest, marking the first historically recorded and confirmed encounter between Europeans and the pre-colonial ancestors of today's Filipinos. And this was over a decade before the so-called discovery of what is now the Philippines in 1521. Early European accounts from the 1500s even described the Luzones people in Malacca as almost one people with the Malays of Brunei, reflecting the close relations and intertwined cultures of our ancestors across the islands of Southeast Asia. Magellan bought the young Enrique in Malacca. He baptized him into Christianity and then took him back to Portugal and then to Spain, making Enrique the first well-documented Southeast Asian in Europe. In fact, in Magellan's will in 1519, Enrique was promised freedom upon Magellan's death. And that detail alone tells us that Enrique was more than just a property. He was seen as valuable. And we'll come back to this later in the video. If Enrique de Malacca is from Malacca, then why do some Filipinos claim him as Filipino? There are three major theories about Enrique's origins, and each one of them tells us something about the fascinating history of Southeast Asia. So first, Magellan's last will referred to Enrique as a native of Malacca, and he spoke fluent Bahasa Melayu, the trade language in Southeast Asia. Enrique was likely part of the Malaccan Sultanate long before being enslaved by Magellan, which is why many Malaysians consider him as part of their maritime legacy. Enrique is also remembered as Panglima Awang, a name popularized by a novel that reimagined him as a national hero in Malaysia, and today it remains a powerful cultural symbol of how Malaysians connect with Enrique's story and legacy. Now second, the Italian chronicler of the expedition, Antonio Pigafetta, also wrote that Enrique was actually from Sumatra, or what we now call Sumatra in Indonesia. And during that time, Sumatra and Malacca were actually part of the same cultural sphere and trade networks, closely tied through maritime exchange, intermarriages, and political alliances. In fact, many scholars believe that the Malay people today can trace their roots all the way back to the coastal regions of eastern Sumatra. And that is why many Indonesians see Enrique as part of their own history, as a native son of Sumatra who played an important role on the world stage. Now here's the curveball. When the expedition reached the Visayas, Enrique could understand the locals. And so, many Filipinos believe that this means he was born in the Visayas, enslaved as a young person, and then sold through Malacca. And if this was true, Enrique would have been the first recorded early Filipino in Europe. But here's the twist. Enrique did not actually speak Visayan. He spoke Malay or Bahasa Melayu. the lingua franca of the region. You know how English connects people globally today? Bahasa Melayu was the widely understood and widely spoken language of trade and diplomacy back then in Southeast Asia. So where exactly was Enrique from? The thing is, we may never know for sure, but the fact that people from diverse cultures connect with his story, the fact that people from across the region see themselves in Enrique reveals just how powerful his legacy has become, just how deeply Enrique resonates across Southeast Asia. So was Enrique Malaysian, Indonesian, or Filipino? Or does it even matter? Let us know what you think in the comments below. What we do know is that Enrique was Southeast Asian. He was in fact Austronesian, the ancestors of modern-day Filipinos, Malaysians, Indonesians, and so many more. And no matter the exact place of where he was born or where he grew up, one thing is clear: Enrique played a crucial role in Magellan's historic expedition. We always hear about Magellan, Elcano, and about the so-called Age of Discovery. But here's what they don't really tell you. Magellan's expedition would not have survived without Enrique de Malacca. Enrique was Magellan's only bridge to the local indigenous communities. Without him, the European crew would have been stranded. They would not have been able to complete their journey. Enrique was the only one who spoke Bahasa Melayu, again the lingua franca of Southeast Asia, which made him Magellan's main link to local rulers, traders, and political alliances. And when the European fleet reached Limasawa in what is now the Philippines, the Spaniards had no idea what to expect. But Enrique stepped in. He spoke to the locals in his native tongue, and to everyone's surprise, the Visayans understood him. The Europeans were starving, and they were running out of supplies. But that moment opened the door. Thanks to Enrique, the Europeans secured food, supplies, and safe passage. In fact, this would not be the last time that Enrique changed the course of the expedition. Later in Cebu, Enrique introduced Magellan to Raja Humabon, the king of Cebu, and through Enrique's translations, they negotiated a blood compact, thus forging a key political alliance with the Visayans. Unknown to many, Enrique was also the first to explain Christianity to the locals, setting the stage for the mass conversions that followed. And if you think about it, Enrique was not just interpreting, he was shaping history, guiding the expedition across unfamiliar waters, and through fragile diplomacy. In fact, without Enrique, none of this would have happened. Enrique's understanding of the local cultures and customs helped Magellan avoid conflict as they moved through the archipelago. Enrique likely warned Magellan about potential dangers, navigating not just, geography but culture and relationships. And this may be the very reason the expedition survived as long as it did and eventually made its way back to Europe. Everything was going great for the Europeans. Until one day, Magellan made a fatal mistake. But for Enrique de Malacca, this mistake was an opportunity to change his destiny. Fresh off his alliance with Raja Humabon in Cebu, Magellan believed he could extend Spanish control and influence even further. He demanded that Lapu-Lapu, the ruler of nearby Mactan, submit. And the Spaniards did not take no for an answer. On April 27, 1521, Magellan led an attack on the island of Mactan. But unknown to the Europeans, they're walking straight into a slaughterhouse. And within just 1 hour, the European forces were crushed. They were decimated, and Magellan himself was killed in battle, leaving the European crew leaderless and exposed. Now Enrique had served Magellan for over a decade, but now Magellan was gone, and Enrique expected to be freed. After all, that's what Magellan had promised in his will. This should have been Enrique's moment of freedom, but instead, the surviving Spanish captains had other plans. Instead of honoring Magellan's will to free Enrique, Duarte Barbosa and João Serrao ignored it. In fact, they ordered Enrique to keep serving the Europeans, passing him from one master to the next. Now Enrique had two choices. Option number 1, to accept a life of slavery under new masters, or option number 2, find a way out. Enrique chose option number 2, to be free. A few days later, Raja Humabon invited the Spaniards to a feast. Now on the surface, this seemed like a gesture of goodwill, hosted by their ally, the King of Cebu. But was it something else? The overconfident Spaniards walked straight into a trap. The doors were shut. Chaos erupted and blood spilled everywhere. Many Spaniards were massacred on the spot, including Duarte Barbosa. In fact, only a handful managed to escape. Did Enrique de Malacca conspire with Raja Humabon? Did he actually take revenge on the Europeans for denying his freedom? Antonio Pigafetta writes that Enrique had complained of ill treatment and that he went to the King of Cebu, complaining that he had not been released as Magellan had ordered. Some historians believe that this moment may have been the spark that led to what happened next, the massacre during the feast in Cebu. Now, one thing's for sure, Enrique survived, but was he just a bystander or did he help plan it? So according to Antonio Pigafetta, Enrique may have actually warned Raja Humabon. And if that's true, then Enrique did not just survive. He turned and quite literally flipped the tables on his oppressors. And if it's not, then why did the Spaniards never mention him again? And if you think about it, Enrique had every reason to turn on the Spaniards. They betrayed Magellan's promise, denied him his freedom, and treated him as property again. Some historians believe that Enrique may have convinced Raja Humabon to act, helping orchestrate the deadly ambush. Now others see it differently. Maybe Enrique was not really out for revenge, that he was simply just seeking freedom. He may have simply warned Humabon for his own safety, knowing that the Spaniards were becoming more and more unstable and dangerous. In this view, Enrique saw an opening and vanished into it. Either way, the result is the same. After the massacre, Enrique disappears from historical records. No more mentions, no trace, just silence. So was Enrique de Malacca a traitor to the Spaniards, literally a backstabber? Or was he simply just a man trying to survive? So after the massacre, he just vanished. No records, no mentions at all, nothing. One moment, he was at the heart of the expedition, translating, negotiating, surviving. And the next, gone, with no explanations. The massacre changed everything. The Spanish records go silent after Cebu, whether by choice or by chance. Enrique left no trace. Some historians believe that Enrique may have been killed by the remaining Spaniards. Indeed, after the massacre, tensions were high. The expedition was actually falling apart and trust was gone. It is possible that the Spaniards, angry and paranoid, turned against Enrique. There's no record of it, but considering how quickly they began turning on each other, it wouldn't be surprising. Yet still, if they had executed Enrique, then wouldn't Pigafetta have written it down? Another theory suggests that Enrique stayed behind in the Philippines. While he didn't speak Visayan, he could still communicate through Bahasa Melayu, which many locals understood. Indeed, he already had a connection to Raja Humabon, the king of Cebu, and after being denied his freedom, Enrique may have simply disappeared and immersed himself into local Visayan society, finally escaping a life of enslavement. Now in this version, Enrique did not just survive, he found a way to live free. And then there's the most mind-blowing theory that Enrique made it back to Malacca. If Enrique successfully managed to catch a local trade ship heading west, he might have completed a full circumnavigation of the globe without even realizing it, long before Elcano made it back to Spain. Sailing from Cebu to Malacca was not unusual back then. In fact, it was a common route for traders, just over 2,600 kilometers. And if Enrique made that journey back to Malacca, then the first person to circle the globe was not a European explorer, but an enslaved Southeast Asian who slipped through the cracks of history. This alone would challenge the Eurocentric narrative of who really discovered what. If Enrique de Malacca beat Elcano, if he truly was the first one to complete the journey around the world, then why was his name forgotten in history, while Magellan and Elcano got all the glory? Either way, Enrique's story does not end here. In fact, today's scholars are pushing to reclaim his place in history. We often take the official version of history for granted, but if you look closer, you'll find pieces missing. Sometimes the most important stories are the ones that didn't make it into the textbooks. So what happens when key voices get left out? Enrique de Malacca was not just a footnote in Magellan's journey. He was a survivor, a power player, and maybe even the first to truly successfully circle the planet. Yet, after the massacre in Cebu, Enrique's name disappears from Spanish records. Now, was this intentional? Maybe, but most likely, colonial records and chroniclers simply didn't see Enrique as someone worth remembering. Ferdinand Magellan and Sebastian Elcano became legends. But what about Enrique? Sadly forgotten. And yet, Enrique was there every step of the way, guiding the expedition, not just with maps or weapons but with language and diplomacy. Enrique helped steer the Europeans through unfamiliar waters, brokered alliances, explained their religion, and built bridges they couldn't have crossed without him. Still, the official narrative fixates on European discovery, ignoring the Southeast Asians who made that survival possible. Chroniclers like Pigafetta called Enrique a slave, never truly acknowledging his knowledge, his agency, or the possibility that he'd circled the world before any European did. And this fits a familiar pattern. Indigenous allies reduced to the background, like the Luzones in Malacca. Non-European navigators were dismissed, their resistance reframed as betrayal. But Enrique's story challenges that entire framework. He wasn't just a side character, he was the key. Today, scholars from Malaysia, Indonesia, and the Philippines are working to bring his name back into conversation. In Malaysia, Enrique is seen as part of the legacy of the Malacca Sultanate. In Indonesia, Enrique is linked to Sumatra and Nusantara's rich maritime history. And in the Philippines, many view Enrique as part of early Filipino history, resonating with those reclaiming pre-colonial connections to global narratives. No matter which claim is true or which one you believe in, one thing is certain: Enrique de Malacca was not a passive servant. He was a global traveler, an interpreter, and an active agent in one of the most significant voyages in world history. So whether or not Enrique de Malacca completed the historic circumnavigation of the world, the bigger question is, why has he been forgotten in world history? Just think about it. If Enrique made his way back to Malacca, he would have unknowingly completed the first circumnavigation of the globe, long before Elcano, before Spain could claim the glory. Now, there's no surviving record to prove it. But then again, even if we never find one, does it really matter? Because the question is not really just about who crossed the finish line first. More importantly, it is about who gets remembered. For centuries, mainstream history has centered European names and erased and ignored the indigenous people who made their journey possible. Enrique was there at every critical moment, yet his name was left out of the story. Reclaiming his legacy means more than rewriting the headline. It means confronting the deeper ways colonial powers controlled the narrative of so-called discovery and defined whose lives were worth recording at all. It is a step towards telling a fuller and more honest history, one that includes everyone who shaped it, regardless of the color of their skin. And in doing so, we are reminding the world that these stories were not lost, they were ignored, and they've been waiting to be uplifted and finally be heard. Unknown to many today, including many Filipinos, Enrique de Malacca was not the only Southeast Asian who played a key role in Magellan's expedition. He was not the only Southeast Asian who helped shape this historic expedition and voyage around the world. And if you found Enrique's story fascinating, he's actually just one of the many people whose names have been forgotten in mainstream history. So if you want to dig deeper, check out my book, What They Never Told You About the Discovery of the Philippines. All about the untold histories defying colonial narratives, just like Enrique's. In fact, one of the stories I covered in this book is actually about my own ancestor, Raja Aceh, aka Raja Matanda of Maynila, a fierce young prince from Luzon who was abducted by the Spaniards in 1521. And just like Enrique, Raja Aceh's story was nearly erased from history. But what if I told you that Raja Aceh, along with Pasekulan of Makassar in what is now Indonesia, might have actually helped save the Magellan-Elcano expedition. So make sure to watch my other video on the fascinating story of the Prince of Luzon and the slave from Makassar. So what do you think? Should Enrique be officially recognized as the first person to successfully circle the globe? Or does his story actually reveal something even bigger? The forgotten sacrifices and the hidden contributions of Southeast Asians in world history. Drop your thoughts in the comments below. And if there's something that I missed or something that you want to add from your own cultures and backgrounds, let us know in the comments below. Let us all learn from one another. Maraming salamat po. Or in Kapampangan, dakal pong salamat kay Kongan. And in Binisaya, daghang salamat sa inyong tanan. And in Bahasa Milayo, terima kasih. See you next time, or in Tagalog kita kits and in Kapampangan, Nikitix, and in Binisaya, kita aita, and in Bahasa Milayo, jumpa lagi!